Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Discriminating Gamer, the board game review show that Charles Foster Kane was talking about when he said, Rosebud. My name is Cody, and let me ask you a question. When you were younger, did you ever want to fight off an alien invasion, rally the various people around the world, and send those aliens packing? I did. I told my high school guidance counselor that, and he prescribed Ritalin. Anyway, we're going to go ahead now and take a look at a game that does just that. And of course, it's called XCOM from Fantasy Flight Games. In XCOM, the board game, 1 to 4 players are going to work together in order to stop this alien invasion of the Earth. Now, each player is going to be assigned a very specific role in the game. You're going to have the commander, you're going to have the chief scientist, you're going to have the squad leader, and you're going to have the central intelligence officer. And each of these roles plays very, very differently. But the players are all going to have to work together and constantly negotiate in order to make this work. Now, of course, this game is kind of branching off into some new technology because one of the most important things that the Central Intelligence Officer will do during the game is manage the app. Now, the app is a free download that you can get on most tablet devices and laptops, so you can use that as part of the game. In fact, you have to use that as part of the game. You cannot play XCOM the board game without using the app. Now, each player has a starter card, and the starter cards have a very clear distinction about when they can be played. They can be played anytime during the timed phase or anytime during the resolution phase. And you're going to have these starter cards, these asset cards, and then later you're going to, of course, get tech cards that can give you more options and abilities. Now, the game is essentially played out in 2 phases, a timed phase and then a resolution phase. Now, during the timed phase, the job of the Central Intelligence Officer is to manage the app. Now, he's going to hit done whenever a task is completed and a new task will appear. The Central Intelligence Officer will then tell everybody around the board what tasks they need to accomplish and how much time they have to accomplish it. Crisis, Commander, crisis. Okay. Got 15 seconds. Now, some of the tasks are for the Central Intelligence Officer himself. He has to put UFOs on the board. The app will tell him in which continents the new UFOs are placed. He also has to place UFOs in orbit above the planet. Central Intelligence Officer will also have a kind of currency in the game, satellites. He'll use those satellites to assign to positions in orbit where they can attack the UFOs in orbit. But also, he's going to have certain starter cards that allow him certain abilities, and he may gain more cards from the tech as the game progresses, and he spends the satellite tokens on these cards in order to accomplish various things. The commander is responsible for the budget. Essentially, every time any player puts anything out there on the board, it costs money. And the commander's job is to make sure that everybody stays in budget, that nobody goes hog wild and just does everything they want to do because you can't afford it, and it's going to cause problems later in the game in the resolution phase if you go over budget. Also, the commander is going to be responsible for deploying interceptors. These are your fighter aircraft that are going to try to take down these UFOs. Now, for every fighter aircraft, every interceptor you have on a continent, and you can place up to 3 on any continent during the game, you get essentially 1 dice roll to try to take down the UFO over that continent. Now, one other important thing that the commander does is deal with the crises. The Central Intelligence Officer will tell him that a crisis is up, and the commander then has to pick 2 cards off the crises deck. He's going to look at both of them, and then he has a very short amount of time to decide which crisis the team is going to resolve in the resolution phase. The other card just goes back into a discard pile, and then the selected card goes on the board, and that will be resolved toward the resolution phase. But there may be multiple crises that come up, so you may have several of those cards over the course of a round. The chief scientist, of course, is responsible for developing new technologies that are going to help out the other players in the game in their respective roles. So the chief scientist has 3 slots on the board where he can research science. So he has a tech deck, and what's going to happen is the Central Intelligence Officer is going to tell him, usually right at the beginning of the time phase, you need to select the 6 technologies, or at least bring his hand up to 6. So he's got 6 cards in his hand, and then later the Central Intelligence Officer will tell the chief scientist, go ahead and select a technology for slot 1. Now if there's already a slot there from a preceding round, he can choose to switch it out, or he can just place one there if there's not one there. But again, he's got a very short amount of time to select what tech he is going to put there. Now also, he is going to have to decide how many scientists he is going to devote toward research for that particular tech. Now, just like the interceptors and the other units on the board, the scientists costs money. So the chief scientist is going to have to negotiate with the commander and the other players. Do we want to really research this tech or not? And again, each scientist that the chief scientist puts out is going to be worth 1 die roll during the resolution phase. In many ways, the squad leader, or tactical officer as I like to think of him, probably has the most difficult job in the game. Because the squad leader is going to, first of all, select missions to go on in the game, and he has got to defend the base. And he's got to do a lot with very little, because he can deploy different unit types to the board. And when he deploys those unit types to the board, he's looking for symbols of that unit type that are going to match symbols either in the missions or symbols on the alien invaders as they're coming along the base. So the Central Intelligence Officer is going to tell Tactical Officer things like, okay, we've got an alien in the base. He has to draw an alien card, put it in the base. Or you've got to select a mission now, and he can replace an existing mission, or he can just stick to the mission there. He can deploy soldiers to a mission, or deploy soldiers to the base, and either to win the mission or to defend the base. There's a very delicate amount of resources that he has to deal with. And again, he has to negotiate with both the scientist, the commander, and the Central Intelligence Officer for those limited resources to do his job. Now, when the timed phase is over, you proceed to the resolution phase. Now the pressure's down a little bit because you're not just in this frantic trying to negotiate back and forth and making decisions very, very quickly. Now, in the resolution phase, you essentially resolve all those things that you set up during the time phase. In fact, the time phase is kind of like the portion of the game where you have to hurry and frantically set up the best you can for the conditions of the resolution phase. The resolution phase, pressure's off because you don't have that time to worry about, but it's still on because there's going to be a lot of nasty things that are going to happen. Now, you're also going to have to resolve the various crises from the crises deck, and these things can really, really hurt you. They can cause all sorts of problems to any of the players and what they're trying to accomplish. And of course, it can cause morale problems to your various continents. It's just a nasty, nasty surprise that you're going to get every turn. Now, one of the most important things that's going to happen during the resolution phase is the die rolls for all the things you set up in the timed phase. For instance, the commander is going to do his die rolls for his interceptors attacking UFOs. What the commander is going to do is take a number of blue XCOM dice for all the interceptors he has in a given continent. Now, these XCOM dice are D6s, and they only have 2 success faces on them. Also, he's going to roll a red D8 with numbers on it, and that's very important, and it relates to a threat track. How that works is, on your very first turn, the threat track is at 1. You're going to take the dice, you're going to roll them, and for every XCOM symbol that pops up, success symbol that pops up, you can eliminate one of the UFOs. But if ever on that red die you roll a number that is equal to or less than the threat tracker, you fail. Your planes are destroyed, your interceptors are destroyed, and unless you scored a hit against the UFO, it remains there. Now, every time you roll the dice, the threat marker then increases by 1 from 1 all the way up to 5. So it becomes progressively more likely you're going to roll a fail that's going to stop you. So there's a real push your luck element here to the dice rolls. Now the chief scientist is going to be doing the same thing when he is rolling for that tech. Now, of course, the squad leader is going to be rolling those same kinds of dice rolls to accomplish his missions and to defend the base. He's going to roll 1 for every figure he's got up against either that alien in the base or the conditions of the mission. The Central Intelligence Officer is going to roll his satellites against the UFOs in orbit, and hopefully he'll knock those down as well. Now, for every UFO that's left over a continent after the die roll, you're going to move that continent's panic level up 1. And that's going to be steadily advancing. These continents are going to get more scared and more scared and more scared as they approach the end of the track. And these continents are going to get more and more panicked, and they're going to head toward a certain part of the track. Now, they all start out in the yellow, they're going to move into the red, and if ever 2 of them reach orange, game is over. But some nasty things are going to happen, like some of your funding is going to get cut if they hit red. So you really want to make sure your various continents are not getting too panicked. Now, there's also your headquarters. Now, your HQ had been selected by the app at the beginning of the game on one of the continents, and for whatever continent your HQ is on, you've got a certain advantage. But when those aliens attack your HQ, again, bad things can happen. Now, if your squad leader was unable to kill the aliens, if there are aliens still in the HQ, then you're going to move your HQ damage marker up 1. Now, it may occasionally hit a red spot. When it does, you look at a card you selected at the beginning of the game, kind of your general plot of the alien card, and whatever the specific red marker is on that, some negative effect triggers. Now, if ever the damage in your HQ gets to the very end, once again, if you lost your base, you can't keep fighting them, game is over. So that is just kind of a basic overview of the rules. There's, of course, a lot more to it than that, but every round you're going to go ahead, you're going to do that time phase, you're going to set yourself up for the resolution phase, then you're going to resolve everything, and hopefully you will successfully defend the planet Earth. Now, quite a lot has been made about using the app in board games. Now, a while back, I even kind of went on a rant where I was rather skeptical about this kind of technology on Board Game Breakfast. But not long after that, I played Golem Arcana from Harebrained Schemes, which was a great game that uses an app. It's kind of a tactical war game where you use miniatures and you tap an app and you tap the miniatures, and that was a lot of fun. I actually enjoyed it. Kind of a good integration of video game and board game there. Now, as far as the app for XCOM goes, I wondered if it would kind of do the same thing, bridge the gap between video game and board game. And of course, the XCOM board game is based on the XCOM video game, which I have never played, but I've heard great things about. Well, the app is more than just a gimmick, and I thought it would be. I was really skeptical. After I played Golem Arcana, I kind of was less skeptical, but still I was wondering. The app just really functions as kind of a timer and a bookkeeper, and it throws some fun curveballs at you. And yet, the game is still very much on the board. I was reading a comment to a video on YouTube recently for Board Game Breakfast where they were talking about this thing about apps, and somebody mentioned, well, I like the tactical feel of a board game. I like to roll dice. I like to play cards from my hand. I like to move figures around a board. Well, XCOM, it's got dice, it's got cards, it's got figures, so it meets that criteria. And more than that, it's got tons of human interaction because you are constantly negotiating with all of the other players on the board. This is very much a cooperative board game. The app is just a simple mechanical device to assist you. I should say, too, though, that the app has this cool high-tech look to it that does kind of further immerse you into the world of XCOM, and it does it quite well. Now, I know some people have talked, too, just about the idea of it being timed as being kind of something of a gimmick. And some people don't respond well to that kind of time pressure. Having to make quick decisions under the gun, it can be nerve-wracking, and that's kind of the point, but some people just don't respond to that. But what's cool about XCOM is that's not the whole game. In fact, the tough decisions that you are making in XCOM are divided evenly between the time phase and the resolution phase. But during that resolution phase, you are really going to have the push-your-luck mechanic, and you're going to be able to use certain cards for their abilities. You have to make a lot of tough decisions in both phases. What's also cool about XCOM is that each of the players has very distinct roles, and they're playing very distinct parts of the game. They're interacting with the other players, but they're playing their own little, almost kind of meta games amongst themselves. The Central Intelligence Officer, kind of like the XCOM version of Uhura from Star Trek, is kind of relaying information constantly while they have to be on the ball with using their satellites. The tactical officer, he's got his eye on those missions. He's got his eye on defending the base. You got the scientist working hard to develop tech to give to the other people around the board so that they can improve their chances for success and the overall chances for success. And of course, you've got that commander who's sweating and constantly saying, you know, we've got to watch our budget. We've got to watch our money. They're all distinct roles, and I think that's cool because that means there's a possibility for a lot of replayability as you're trying to master each one of these roles in the game. XCOM does have a weakness, and that is that you really need to play this game with 4 players. If you play with less than 4 players, then 1 or 2 people are going to have to double up on the roles, and that is just not as fun. You really want to concentrate on your specific role and your specific character in the game. Likewise, you can't really play with more than 4 because there's only those 4 spots. You could theoretically divide some of the roles, but that wouldn't be much fun either. This is a game that needs 4 players, and exactly 4 players. So XCOM, the board game, is a fantastic cooperative game. I really enjoyed it, kind of in spite of myself. Again, I was quite skeptical going into it, but man, it looked cool, and then when I actually played it, the app's not a gimmick, it's just a fun part of the game. The game itself, I really enjoyed. So the recommendation of the Discriminating Gamer for XCOM the board game is, buy it! Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment here on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. And who knows, maybe one day Fantasy Flight Games will make a sequel to XCOM set in post-Soviet Russia called XCOMmunists. No?
Somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I've been dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
Ah, what are you talking about? It's just your imagination, kid. There's nothing down here but old costumes, props,
And me!